The motel had been invisible for years, which is a different thing than being abandoned. Abandoned places still get looked at. People slow down, people point, people take photos and tell each other stories. This place got ignored. Drivers passed it at highway speed, and their eyes slid right over the sign, right over the dim office window, right over the row of doors that faced the asphalt like tired teeth. It sat just far enough off the main drag to avoid attention and just close enough to still feel useful. A strange middle state. Not dead, not alive. The kind of property that collects dust the way a mouth collects grit. When the new owner bought it, he told himself he was buying square footage and location. A cheap acquisition with upside. A distressed asset. A predictable rehab. He did not tell himself he was buying a habit, because that was the first thing he noticed once he started walking the property with a clipboard and a contractor's impatience. The building had habits. It had a rhythm that felt older than the paint and deeper than the sagging walkway. The office door stuck slightly when he opened it, like it was reluctant. The air inside smelled like paper that had been damp and then dried again, plus the faint, stale sweetness of something that used to be smoke. The front desk was still there. The old key rack was still mounted behind it, though most of the hooks were empty. A dusty security monitor sat in the corner on a metal shelf, unplugged, screen blank. A ledger book rested in a drawer like someone had put it away carefully and never returned. On the inside of the office door, taped at eye level, was a sheet of paper so yellow it looked like it had absorbed the building's entire past. The message on it was blunt, typed in thick, block letters. Do not disturb, always. No room number, no explanation, no signature. It hit him as a weird joke at first, a leftover from some cranky manager, a line meant to make staff laugh, the kind of humor people use when they have to live in a place that never quite feels safe. He peeled the tape gently, and the paper resisted, brittle. He left it where it was. Then he hired a cleaner to help him assess how bad the rooms were and whether anything inside could be salvaged. She was older, efficient, the kind of person who can tell a motel's real condition from the smell in the hallway. She saw the note and stopped like she had walked into a memory. Her face tightened. She stared at it too long. He asked if she had worked here before. She didn't answer immediately. Then she nodded once, and he watched her eyes drift past him toward the hallway that led to the rooms. She did not look curious. She looked cautious. He asked what the note meant. She told him there had been one room they were never allowed to enter, not even to clean, not even to check, not even to verify. The rule was absolute, and it had never been explained in a way that made sense. She told him the room number without emphasis, which somehow made it worse. Room 17. It was not a dramatic number. It did not come with a ready-made superstition. It was plain. It sounded like a mistake someone could make easily, and that was exactly why it lodged in his mind. He walked the property in daylight and counted doors, counted stairwells, counted the broken lights and the boarded windows. The building was shaped like an L with one wing facing the highway and another wing folding back behind a screen of shrubs and a chain link fence. Most of the rooms were visible from the office, some were visible from the road. A few sat in awkward corners where the architecture created blind spots. Room 17 was in the worst blind spot of all. Second floor, far end, corner unit. The walkway turned and narrowed there, and the angle meant you could stand in the office and never see the door at all. Anyone walking to it would be hidden from the front desk after the first few steps. The door looked like the others at first glance, but the longer he stared, the more it refused to feel normal. A plastic "Do Not Disturb" hanger hung from the knob. Not paper, not the cheap kind that curls and tears. Thick plastic, faded and cracked, like it had been in place for years. The string holding it had been replaced more than once. Someone had cared enough to keep it hanging. He tried the key set he received at closing. The master key turned in most locks with a satisfying click. Room 17 did not respond. The key went in, but the lock resisted with the stubborn mechanical feel of hardware that does not belong. He tried again and felt the cylinder grind. Not stuck, not old, different. He wrote down a note to replace the lock. Then he stood there longer than he meant to. It was the corner, the silence, the sense that the building's attention was focused on that door. That night, after the contractors left and the sun dropped and the highway noise became a steady, distant hiss, he returned with a flashlight. He told himself he was being responsible. He told himself he needed to assess all units for safety and liability. He told himself he was just collecting information. He stood outside room 17 and listened. No television hum, no footsteps, no plumbing, nothing that suggested occupancy. He tapped the door lightly with his knuckles, the casual rhythm of someone checking if a room is empty. The sound was wrong. Most motel doors are hollow in a specific way. They sound like thin wood and cheap insulation. This door sounded denser, as if there was extra material inside it or a second layer behind it. He leaned close and looked through the peephole. There was nothing. The peephole had been blocked from the inside by a dark plug cleanly placed, not tape, not tissue. A piece of material that looked like it was cut for the purpose. It was not the gesture of a guest who wanted privacy. It was the gesture of someone who did not want anyone looking in under any circumstances. He stepped away, and his skin prickled with a sensation he hated because it felt irrational. He went back to the office and sat behind the counter where hundreds of strangers had once leaned and asked for rates. In the dust, he could see faint finger streaks on the counter's edge, old marks from hands that used to belong there. He stared at his own notes and felt the project shift in his mind from renovation to something like excavation. The next morning, he called a locksmith. The locksmith arrived with the relaxed confidence of a man who thought every lock was a predictable puzzle. He walked the walkway, looked at room 17, and paused. He ran his thumb over the lock faceplate and frowned. He said nothing, but his body language changed. Less casual, more careful. He worked the lock. The pick set moved with practiced speed. The cylinder clicked. The door did not open. There was another latch inside. That detail should have been comforting in a way. Another barrier, another layer, something that implied caution. Instead, it felt like an argument with him, like the building was saying no again. The locksmith used a thin tool and worked the interior latch. It popped free. The door opened a few inches. A smell leaked out that did not match the rest of the motel. The rest of the place smelled like damp drywall, old carpet, and sun-baked dust. This smelled older and drier, like fabric that had been sealed away and then reopened. It also carried a faint chemical edge, the residue of cleaning agents used repeatedly and then abandoned. The owner pushed the door wider. The room was not stripped like the others. It was staged. The bed was made tight, as if someone who hated wrinkles had pulled the corners until the fabric was flat and obedient. The curtains were drawn. The dresser sat against the far wall. The television that once sat on top was gone, leaving a clean rectangular outline in the dust where it had been. The nightstand held a notepad and pen placed neatly, like a ritual offering. Even the trash can liner looked too deliberate, folded just so. The owner stepped inside and the temperature felt wrong. Cooler than the hallway, as if the room held onto cold air and refused to share warmth. The locksmith lingered in the doorway, no longer confident. His eyes tracked the corners. His jaw tightened. The owner moved toward the far wall and noticed something that made his brain stall for a second, like it had to relearn what it was seeing. There was a second door. Not the bathroom. Not the closet. A flat panel set into the wall behind the dresser, painted the same color with no handle and no visible latch. If you glanced at it, you would assume it was drywall. If you looked closely, you could see the seam. Too clean, too precise. He slid his fingers along the bottom edge and found a shallow, recessed grip. A service door, the kind of thing built into older properties so staff could move behind walls, check plumbing, route wiring, access maintenance spaces. Usually they are hidden behind laundry rooms or mechanical closets, not behind a guest room dresser, not inside a unit someone was told never to enter. He pulled. The panel resisted, then shifted with a scrape that sounded like paint and dust breaking their long agreement. A narrow gap opened. Cold air spilled out. Not a breeze from the hallway, not air-conditioned flow. Cold air like something underground. He leaned closer and the smell changed again. Concrete, dampness, a faint metallic scent, the sterile dryness of a place that has no sunlight. He opened the panel further and aimed his flashlight into the gap. The beam landed on a narrow corridor of unfinished concrete behind the wall. Pipes and bundled conduit ran along one side. The corridor floor was dusty, but the dust was not pristine. It had been disturbed recently in a way that looked like foot traffic. He did not have to say it. The locksmith did not have to say it. Their bodies understood the same truth at the same time. Someone had been back there. The owner stepped into the corridor only a foot, only enough to see. He saw a faint scuff line where something heavy had been dragged. He saw a thin trail in the dust that could have been made by a shoe. He saw a fresh scrape mark on the wall at shoulder height, the kind that happens when a person brushes past the same spot repeatedly. Then, he noticed the most obscene detail, the one that turned his stomach. On the corridor floor, just inside the panel, lay another "Do Not Disturb" hanger. The same thick plastic style as the one on the knob. It was lying in the dust as if it had been dropped quickly. The dust around it was scuffed in a rough oval like someone had turned fast. He backed out of the corridor without thinking. The locksmith stepped away from the door as if the room might bite. The owner closed the panel, shoved the dresser back toward it without meaning to, then stopped, realizing that moving furniture now felt like destroying evidence. He closed the main door to room 17 and locked it. His hands were shaking in a way he did not like. Not panic exactly, something tighter, like the body's alarm system had moved from warning to command. He called the police. The first responding officer arrived with the tired skepticism that comes from too many calls that turn out to be nothing. A rundown motel, a nervous owner, a strange door. It sounded like a property dispute or a drug squatter situation, or a new owner overreacting. Then the officer saw the staged room, the blocked peephole, the modified hardware, the hidden panel, and the officer's posture changed. Subtle, but real. the body language of someone whose instincts have been trained by too many ugly surprises. Backup arrived. A supervisor arrived. They entered the room and documented everything the way professionals do when they do not want their future testimony ripped apart. They photographed the door. They photographed the blocked peephole. They photographed the bed. They photographed the panel seams and the paint line. They photographed the dust patterns in the corridor. They marked scuffs and scrape lines. Then they moved into the corridor. It ran behind multiple rooms, connecting blind spots and dead corners. There were access points along the way, some sealed, some loosely covered. In one section, the corridor widened, suggesting a junction of utility runs. In another section, it narrowed so tightly that shoulder-to-wall movement left unavoidable contact. The corridor ended at a locked metal door, a door that led downward. The owner had not known the motel had a basement. The supervisor asked for keys, and the owner could only spread his hands. He had a rig of room keys and a master that apparently was not truly master. He did not have a key for a hidden basement door behind a service corridor no one mentioned. They forced the lock. The metal door opened and the air that came out of the stairwell was unmistakable. Damp, stale, cold. The smell of concrete that has been wet for years and never properly dried. They descended carefully. Flashlights swept the steps. The beams caught spiderwebs and old wiring and water stains. The basement ceiling was low. The walls were rough. The floor had puddled sections where water collected and then evaporated, leaving tide marks. At the bottom, they found signs of recent habitation, and this was the point where the case stopped being strange and became dangerous. A makeshift sleep-in area, layered blankets over cardboard, a plastic bottle half full of water, food wrappers, a cheap portable battery pack, a flashlight that looked too new to belong in a forgotten basement, and in a pile near the bedding, a stack of do not disturb hangers. Not one, not two. A collection. Some plastic, some paper, some old, some newer. Gathered and kept. It was the kind of detail that makes experienced officers stop talking because it suggests the place had rules and someone had been enforcing them. They moved deeper and found another door set into concrete, heavier than the rest, with a padlock that was newer and shinier than everything around it. The hardware looked at a place, like a modern tooth in an old jaw. They cut the padlock and opened the door. Behind it was a small room that did not belong to any legitimate maintenance design. The air inside was thicker. There was a chair positioned at an angle as if someone had thought about sightlines. There were anchor points in the wall. There were marks on the floor showing the chair had been moved and placed repeatedly. The room did not need words to explain itself. The shape of it told the story. The supervisor ordered everyone back and called in detectives and crime scene technicians. The motel became a sealed scene. The owner stood in the parking lot, watching officers move through the property with lights and clipboards and evidence bags, and the sickest part was realizing how easy it would have been for him to renovate right over it. Paint the walls, replace the carpet, swap locks, advertise weekly rates, welcome guests into a building with a hidden spine behind the rooms. Do not disturb, always. It stopped sounding like a warning and started sounding like a training instruction. Crime scene techs processed the corridor like it was a tunnel through time. They took prints where prints could survive. They swabbed surfaces where skin oils might cling. They collected fibers from the bed and the chair and the blankets. They photographed tool marks on the modified lock hardware. They examined the peephole plug and removed it carefully. Behind the plug, they found more than a blockage. They found evidence the plug had been inserted and removed multiple times. Tiny scratches in the rim. A pattern of wear. This was not a one-time act by a paranoid guest. This was a procedure. Detectives pulled property records and learned the motel had changed hands more than once, often through quiet sales and foreclosure. The previous owner had died, according to the file, or at least that was what the paperwork implied. There were gaps. There were months where the motel appeared to have no active business license, but also no recorded closure. It existed in administrative limbo, which is where a lot of bad things thrive. They pulled old guest ledgers and found something that made the owner feel cold when the detective later summarized it. Room 17 was missing from the ledger in multiple months. Not listed, not marked vacant, not marked occupied, simply absent, as if it did not exist as a room you could rent. In the months where it did appear, it was often blocked off by a notation that implied maintenance. No explanation, no invoice, no reported work. Just a repeating pattern of the room being removed from the hotel's normal life. They compared that pattern to reports of incidents in the area. Not official investigations in many cases, but calls that had been classified as low priority. A person who did not check out and whose credit card later declined. A transient who was reported missing by a family member weeks after last contact. A runaway report filed and then quietly abandoned. A woman who told a friend she was staying at a motel near the highway, then went silent. Individually, each report looked like noise. Together, they began to look like a map. The detectives checked whether any of those people had been traced to the motel. The motel's system had been primitive. Cash payments, fake names, rooms rented by the week, guests who did not want attention. The building was designed for anonymity, and anonymity is a weapon if someone is willing to use it. They interviewed former staff if they could find them. Many had moved. Some refused to talk. A few gave small pieces of memory that sounded harmless until you heard them in the context of the corridor. One recalled that there was always a standing instruction to keep away from the far corner. Another recalled that the manager used to handle certain issues personally and would get angry if anyone asked questions. Another remembered the smell on some mornings, a heavy chemical cleaning smell, stronger than normal, drifting down the walkway. They talked to a former night clerk who had worked the desk when the motel was still active enough to have a steady stream of guests. The clerk described a man who came and went at odd hours, not as a guest. He had keys that worked. He did not check in. He did not speak to the desk much. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed the building belonged to him more than it belonged to the owner. The clerk said everyone learned to look away, to mind their own business, to accept the rule. Always. The owner, meanwhile, had his own problem that he did not mention to police at first because it sounded like paranoia. After the motel was sealed, he went back to his house and tried to sleep. He could not. His mind kept replaying the corridor, the scuffed dust, the hanger on the floor, the idea that someone had walked behind those walls while the front of the motel looked dead and harmless. In the early hours, he heard a vehicle outside. He looked out and saw headlights pause briefly, as if someone had stopped to watch his house. The vehicle moved on. He told himself it was nothing. Then it happened again the next night. A slow pass, a pause, a departure. This time he caught enough of the silhouette to feel his chest tighten. A taller vehicle, possibly a van or truck. Common, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of vehicle you do not remember unless you have a reason. He informed detectives, and they listened without dismissing him. They placed patrols. They checked for cameras on nearby intersections. They asked him if he had told anyone about the corridor besides contractors and police. He had not, but news travels in small towns and among people who watch police scanners. The motel had already become a rumor. The thing about hidden systems is that someone always built them, and builders sometimes come back to check if their work is still hidden. Detectives widened the net. They traced who had been contracted for renovations years earlier. They traced who had done lock changes. They traced who had access to master keys. They traced who had worked night shifts. They traced who had been arrested for trespassing on the property after it closed. A name surfaced that was attached to small reports. A man who had been cited for being on the property after closure. A man who had once claimed he was doing maintenance work. A man who had ties to the previous manager. They obtained warrants and searched his storage unit. Inside, among ordinary tools and junk, they found motel items that should not have been in private storage. Key blanks, old lock cylinders, a box of do not disturb hangers identical to the ones found in the basement, still wrapped in faded plastic, and more importantly, a set of photographs. Not scenic motel photos, not real estate photos, photos of room doors, photos of the far corner walkway, photos of the service panel seen behind the dresser, documentation, the kind people keep when they treat a place as a controlled environment. The detectives searched further and found one more thing that made the owner's stomach roll. A hand-drawn map of the motel's behind-the-wall corridor, showing not just the path behind room 17, but also a branching section that led toward the laundry block and the office. The corridor did not merely connect rooms. It connected to the building's heart. It was a way to move unseen between public and private spaces, to enter rooms without using the walkway, to exit without being seen, to hide in the spine of the structure while the surface stayed quiet. The suspect was located and brought in. The detectives did not need dramatics to understand what they were dealing with. They had the corridor. They had the modified lock. They had evidence of recent use. They had the basement room. They had a person with knowledge and a map. The rest would be built in court, slowly, with the methodical weight of procedure. In the meantime, the motel sat sealed behind tape and barricades, lights off, the sign dark, the parking lot empty. It looked peaceful almost, like the building had finally been forced into real silence. The owner returned once, accompanied by an officer to retrieve documents from the office. He walked the walkway again, and the far corner felt different now. Not haunted, exposed, like a secret compartment that had been opened and could never be closed the same way. Room 17's door still had the hanger. It still said, "Do not disturb." But now it did not read like a request. It read like an instruction from someone who had trained the building to protect them. And the most unsettling part, the part the owner could not shake even after the property was condemned and the news crews moved on, was simple. The rule had worked for years because people love rules that make their lives easier. Do not enter, do not ask, do not notice. Always. He broke it because he thought he was renovating a dead motel. Instead, he found a hidden door that proved the motel was never dead. It was only quiet enough for someone to keep using it.